In a single moment of recognition, liberation occurs. Not through effort, not through accumulation, not through gradual purification, but through seeing what has always been present. These words, attributed to Padmasambhava, the 8th century master who brought Buddhism to Tibet, point to one of the most closely guarded and widely misunderstood teachings in all of spiritual literature. While most Buddhist paths emphasize gradual development over lifetimes, the cultivation of virtue and wisdom through countless rebirths, there exists within Tibetan Buddhism a radical alternative. The Dzogchen teachings of the Nyingma tradition and the Mahamudra instructions of the Kagyu lineage speak of something seemingly impossible. Complete awakening in this very moment, without prerequisites, without years of practice, without elaborate ritual or philosophical study. If you're ready to explore what Tibetan masters actually teach about instant enlightenment, if you want to understand why these instructions are considered so precious and dangerous that they're traditionally kept secret, then subscribe now and activate notifications, because what you're about to hear challenges everything conventional Buddhism teaches about the spiritual path. The first thing you need to understand is that instant enlightenment teaching exists in profound tension with the gradual path emphasized in most Buddhist schools. The Lamrim, or stages of the path to enlightenment, developed by masters like Atisha and elaborated by Tsongkhapa, presents a systematic progression. You begin by taking refuge in the 3 jewels, develop renunciation of worldly concerns, cultivate compassion through contemplating the suffering of beings, train in the 6 perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom, and gradually purify obscurations over many lifetimes until finally achieving Buddhahood. This gradual approach makes perfect sense to the conceptual mind. You're impure, you purify yourself. You're ignorant, you accumulate knowledge. You're bound by afflictive emotions, you eliminate them one by one. It's logical, structured, achievable through sustained effort. And then Dzogchen comes along and says all of that, while not wrong, is provisional teaching. The ultimate truth is that you've never been impure, never been separate from enlightenment, never needed to achieve what you already are. Longchen Rabjam, who lived in 14th century Tibet and is considered the supreme authority on Dzogchen, wrote extensively about this apparent contradiction. In his Treasury of Natural Perfection, he explains that the great perfection is called great because it encompasses all vehicles and teachings, and perfection because there's nothing to add or remove, nothing to accomplish. Your fundamental nature is primordially pure, timelessly free, spontaneously present. The problem isn't that you lack enlightened qualities. The problem is you don't recognize the nature of your own mind. All the elaborate practices of Tantra, all the philosophical analysis of Sutra, these are skillful means for those who don't yet have the capacity for direct recognition. But for someone who receives the pointing out instruction from a qualified master and genuinely recognizes Rigpa, naked awareness itself, enlightenment is not a distant goal but present reality. This teaching is whispered rather than shouted for very specific reasons that Tibetan masters understood through centuries of transmission. First, it can be catastrophically misunderstood. Someone hears you're already enlightened and thinks they don't need to practice, don't need ethics, don't need to deal with their psychological issues. They confuse intellectual understanding with actual realization. They take everything is primordially pure as license for whatever destructive behavior their afflictive emotions generate. This is called taking the result as path without qualification, and lineage masters unanimously warn it leads to disaster. The second reason for secrecy is that instant enlightenment teaching only works for specific individuals at specific moments. Tibetan Buddhism is exquisitely sensitive to the capacities and proclivities of different practitioners. What liberates one person confuses another. The direct approach requires what's traditionally called sudden capacity, a mind that can remain stable when all reference points dissolve, that can recognize the nature of awareness without immediately falling back into conceptual elaboration. Leave a comment sharing whether you've encountered these direct teachings before and what your experience was. Your insights enrich this exploration for everyone. Let me clarify what instant actually means in this context, because Western interpretations often get this completely wrong. Instant enlightenment doesn't mean that someone who's been an angry, confused mess suddenly transforms into a perfectly compassionate Buddha in a flash of light. What it means is that recognition of the nature of mind can occur instantaneously, not gradually building up over years, but in a single moment of direct seeing. However, as Longchen Rinpoche emphasizes in his teachings that integrate neuroscience with traditional training, recognition and stabilization are different things. You can recognize the nature of awareness in a moment, but stabilizing that recognition, integrating it into all aspects of life, allowing it to transform habitual patterns, this typically requires sustained practice. Most practitioners move between recognition and distraction countless times. The instant is the seeing. The path is learning to remain in that seeing rather than constantly being swept away by thoughts and emotions. The pointing out instruction, the Tibetan Engyo Sprad, is the critical moment in Dzogchen training, where a qualified master directly introduces the student to the nature of mind. This isn't a lecture about the nature of mind. It's not philosophical explanation. It's the master creating specific conditions, using skillful methods. Sometimes a gesture, a shout, a question, a period of silence, whatever works for that particular student in that particular moment, to precipitate direct recognition. Chogyal Namkhai Norbu, a Dzogchen master who taught extensively in the West, described it as the master and student's minds meeting in the same state. The master abides in Rigpa and through various means points the student's awareness directly at itself. When this works, the student recognizes what's been present all along but never noticed, like someone looking everywhere for their glasses while wearing them, then suddenly realizing they're on their face. The glasses were never lost. The problem was looking in the wrong direction. Traditional texts describe 3 types of individuals in relation to instant enlightenment. The best capacity individual hears the teaching and achieves stable realization immediately, like fire meeting dry grass. These are exceedingly rare. The middle capacity individual has genuine recognition, but needs to repeatedly return to it, needs continued guidance, needs to integrate the view into practice. This describes most serious practitioners. The least capacity individual might have a glimpse but can't sustain it, needs extensive gradual training before the direct approach becomes effective. The texts also warn about a 4th type, those with intellectual brilliance but no actual realization, who deceive themselves and others with sophisticated talk about emptiness and primordial purity, while remaining bound by self-clinging and afflictive emotions. This is why lineage and authentic transmission became so important in Tibetan Buddhism. The difference between genuine realization and convincing imitation is subtle, especially to the person experiencing it. The relationship between instant enlightenment teaching and Tantra reveals another layer of sophistication. Vajrayana Buddhism, the tantric vehicle, already represents a rapid path compared to sutra approaches. Through practices like deity yoga, where you visualize yourself as an enlightened being, you're taking the result as the path. Instead of gradually purifying yourself to eventually become a Buddha, you practice being a Buddha now, allowing that practice to transform ordinary perception and habit. But even within Tantra, there are gradual and sudden approaches. The outer Tantras emphasize ritual, mantra recitation, gradual purification. The inner Tantras of Mahayoga and Anuyoga work with channels, winds, and essences, with generation and completion stage practices. Then Hatha Yoga, the Dzogchen approach, cuts through all of that. No visualization, no transformation, no accomplishment, just recognition of what is. Click, like if you're beginning to see the radical nature of what Dzogchen actually teaches, how different it is from mainstream Buddhist practice. Gampopa, the 12th century master who integrated Mahamudra teachings from Milarepa with the Kadampa gradual path, addressed this tension beautifully. He taught that you need both the view of Mahamudra, recognizing mind's nature, and the conduct of Kadampa, ethical behavior and compassionate engagement. Without the view, practice becomes mere accumulation, spiritual materialism. Without proper conduct, the view becomes intellectual abstraction or excuse for selfishness. This integration of instant recognition and gradual cultivation characterizes mature Tibetan Buddhist practice. The recognition can be instant. The purification of subtle, habitual tendencies continues. You're not trying to become enlightened. You're recognizing enlightenment and allowing that recognition to pervade your being. The whispered nature of these teachings relates to what's called Upadesha in Sanskrit, Mengug in Tibetan, the pith instructions passed from master to student in intimate settings. These are not public teachings. They're the distilled essence of the path, instructions stripped of all elaboration, pointing directly to the crucial point. Longchenpa lists 3 characteristics of pith instructions. First, they're easy to practice, requiring no complex ritual or extensive preliminaries. Second, they're suitable for those with limited capacity for intellectual study. Third, they're powerful, capable of producing realization quickly. But these characteristics make them dangerous. Easy to practice means easy to practice wrongly. Suitable for limited capacity doesn't mean suitable for everyone. Powerful means powerful to liberate or powerful to confuse depending on the practitioner's preparation. Let me share what actually happens in direct transmission according to contemporary masters who've written about this with permission to make it more widely available. Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, whose teachings were compiled by his Western students, described Rigpa as the indescribable naturalness of the awakened state. When you receive pointing out instruction and recognize Rigpa, you're not creating some special experience. You're noticing what's already the case. Awareness that knows but isn't a thing. Clarity that appears but has no substance. Openness that's never been confined. The problem is that describing it this way makes it sound like a concept, and Rigpa is precisely not conceptual. It's the preconceptual knowing that's present before thought divides experience into subject and object, self and other, this and that. The 4 yogas of Mahamudra, as taught in the Kagyu tradition, provide a map of how instant recognition deepens. One-pointedness is when you can rest in the nature of mind, but it requires effort and concentration. Simplicity is when conceptual elaboration naturally dissolves and the practice becomes effortless. One taste is when all experiences, pleasant and unpleasant, meditation and post-meditation, are recognized as the same flavor of mind's nature. Non-meditation is when there's nothing to practice because you never fall out of recognition. These stages aren't linear achievements but deepening degrees of stability. Someone might touch non-meditation briefly, then spend years cycling through simplicity and one taste before non-meditation becomes continuous. The instant is the entrance. The path is the journey through these yogas. Tilopa's 6 words of advice to Naropa represent perhaps the most concise expression of instant enlightenment teaching. Don't recall, don't imagine, don't think, don't examine, don't control, rest. 6 instructions that cut through every technique, every method, every spiritual project. Just rest in natural awareness. Don't follow memories of the past. Don't project fantasies about the future. Don't engage in conceptual thinking. Don't analyze your experience. Don't try to manipulate your state of mind. Simply rest. Yet these 6 words, easy to say, represent the culmination of the path. Most people can't follow these instructions for more than a few seconds before the mind begins its habitual activities. The training is learning to return to this natural resting again and again until it becomes effortless. The role of devotion in direct path teaching surprises many Western practitioners who approach Buddhism as philosophy or meditation technique. But in both Dzogchen and Mahamudra, devotion to the master isn't blind faith or personality cult. It's recognition that transmission comes through embodied relationship with someone who has realized what they're teaching. Guru Yoga, the practice of unifying your mind with the master's enlightened mind, creates the condition for instant recognition. When conceptual barriers dissolve in the intensity of devotion, when the usual self-protective ego structures relax, direct transmission can occur. This doesn't mean uncritical acceptance of everything a teacher says or does. The Dalai Lama has repeatedly emphasized that you should test teachers, examine their qualifications, maintain critical intelligence even while practicing devotion. But the recognition of Rigpa often happens in moments of complete openness and trust that devotional practice facilitates. Share this video with anyone seeking genuine teaching on enlightenment beyond gradual accumulation. These insights are rare and precious. The preliminary practices, what's called Ngondro in Tibetan, seem to contradict the instant enlightenment teaching until you understand their actual function. 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 refuge prayers, 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras for purification, 100,000 mandala offerings, 100,000 guru yoga practices. Why would someone pursuing instant enlightenment spend years performing these elaborate preliminaries? Because they're not accumulating merit to eventually deserve enlightenment. They're purifying the obscurations that prevent recognition of what's already present. They're training the mind to concentrate, to generate devotion, to exhaust the conceptual strategies that block direct seeing. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche taught that someone who completes the preliminaries with proper understanding and effort will definitely recognize the nature of mind when given pointing out instruction. The preliminaries don't create enlightenment. They remove the obstacles to recognizing it. The danger of instant enlightenment teaching, manifesting as spiritual bypassing, deserves serious attention. Western Dharma centers have seen countless cases of practitioners using emptiness teaching to avoid dealing with psychological trauma, relationship dysfunction, or ethical lapses. Everything is primordially pure, so my anger doesn't matter. There's no self, so I have no responsibility for my actions. It's all the display of mind's nature, so I can do whatever I want. This is what happens when someone receives advanced teaching without adequate foundation. Tibetan masters traditionally required students to demonstrate stability in preliminary practices, ethical conduct, and basic meditation before giving direct introduction. This wasn't arbitrary gatekeeping. It was skillful pedagogy based on centuries of observation about what actually helps people realize liberation versus what feeds their confusion and self-deception. Let's examine what's called the unity of awareness and emptiness, the crucial recognition in Dzogchen that's simultaneously simple and profound. Awareness, the knowing quality present in this very moment, is not a thing you can find or locate. It's empty of substance, empty of characteristics, empty of independent existence. Yet it's not blank nothingness. It's vividly clear, knowing whatever arises. This inseparability of awareness and emptiness, the fact that the knowing is itself empty and the emptiness is itself knowing, is what's meant by Rigpa. Most Buddhist practice emphasizes realizing emptiness, understanding that phenomena lack inherent existence. Dzogchen adds the recognition that the emptiness itself is aware, that awareness itself is empty. When these are realized as inseparable, not two things unified but one reality with two aspects, that's the view of the Great Perfection. The question of whether instant enlightenment teaching appears in early Buddhism or is a later Tibetan innovation has generated scholarly debate. The Pali Canon contains passages where individuals achieve stream entry or even arahatship upon hearing a brief teaching from the Buddha. The Vimalakirti Sutra, a Mahayana text, emphasizes sudden insight into emptiness. The Platform Sutra attributed to Huineng, the 6th Chan patriarch in China, explicitly advocates sudden enlightenment over gradual cultivation, so the idea isn't unique to Tibet. But Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the Nyingma and Kagyu schools, developed the most systematic presentation of instant enlightenment teachings, the most elaborate methods for preparing students and transmitting direct recognition, the most nuanced understanding of how sudden realization and gradual purification interact. Think about your own experience for a moment. Have you ever had a moment of complete presence where thinking stopped and there was just clear awareness of what is? Maybe in nature, maybe in a moment of beauty or crisis, maybe during meditation. That moment, however brief, is a taste of Rigpa. The problem isn't that Rigpa is rare or difficult to access. The problem is that you don't recognize it when it occurs, and even if you do, you immediately grasp at it, try to maintain it, and in that grasping, lose it. The instant enlightenment teaching is pointing at something always available, not something you need to create or achieve. But recognizing it requires transmission, and stabilizing it requires practice. This is why the teaching is both instant and gradual, both effortless and requiring tremendous effort, both already complete and needing cultivation. Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche made Dzogchen teachings more widely available than any previous master, teaching extensively to Western audiences, without requiring the traditional years of preliminary practice first. He was heavily criticized by some traditional teachers for this. His response was that we're living in degenerate times when the old methods of selective transmission aren't reaching enough people, that more openness was necessary, even if it risked dilution. His approach produced both genuine practitioners who achieved realization and confused individuals who thought they understood Dzogchen when they'd only grasped concepts about it. This tension between preserving purity of lineage and adapting to new contexts remains unresolved in Tibetan Buddhism's encounter with modernity. What's your direct experience of the teaching you've received today? Has anything shifted in how you relate to awareness itself? Share honestly in the comments. The fruition of instant enlightenment practice is described as achieving rainbow body, where at death the physical body dissolves into light, leaving only hair and nails behind. Documented cases exist in recent Tibetan history of practitioners whose bodies shrank to doll size or disappeared completely in the week after death, while their rooms filled with rainbow light and the smell of flowers. Whether you interpret these accounts as literal physical phenomena or symbolic descriptions of complete realization, they point to the tradition's claim that Dzogchen practice can achieve full Buddhahood in a single lifetime, without the need for countless future rebirths. This is the ultimate promise of instant enlightenment teaching, not just a glimpse of your true nature, but complete liberation in this very body, this very life. The practical instruction for someone genuinely interested in this path is straightforward. Find an authentic teacher in a legitimate lineage, either Nyingma, Kagyu, or one of the other schools that transmit these teachings. Approach with both openness and discrimination. Be willing to do the preliminaries, the foundation practices that prepare your mind. Don't expect instant results despite the name instant enlightenment. Paradoxically, grasping for quick realization is the main obstacle to recognizing what's already present. Practice with diligence but without spiritual ambition. Study the texts but don't confuse conceptual understanding with realization. Above all, examine your own mind directly, repeatedly, patiently. The teaching that liberates is not in books or videos. It's in your own awareness when you look at it nakedly without conceptual overlay. Thupten Jinpa bridges traditional scholarship and contemporary accessibility in a way that serves these teachings well. He points out that instant enlightenment doesn't mean instant perfection of compassionate activity. You might recognize the nature of mind, but the habits of selfish behavior, the subtle obscurations that limit your ability to benefit beings, these take time to purify. The Tibetan term for Buddha is Sangai, which means awakened and expanded. Awakening can be instant. The expansion of that awakening into full omniscient capacity to guide beings takes cultivation. This resolves the apparent contradiction between instant and gradual. The recognition is sudden. The maturation is progressive. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. What Tibetan masters whisper about instant enlightenment is both simpler and more challenging than you probably imagined. Simpler because it's not about accumulating anything, achieving anything, becoming anything. It's about recognizing what you already are beneath the layers of conceptual elaboration. More challenging because that recognition requires letting go of everything you use to construct and maintain a sense of self. Every spiritual achievement, every identity as a practitioner, every subtle grasping at enlightenment as a future attainment. When all of that dissolves and what remains is just this, awareness aware of itself, clear and empty and never separate from what appears in it, that's the instant the masters whisper about. That's the recognition that liberates. That's what's always been available, waiting not for you to become worthy, but for you to simply look directly and see what's been staring you in the face all along. Which teaching today most directly pointed you toward recognition? What confused you or raised questions? Leave a comment and let's continue this exploration together. If you haven't subscribed, do it now because we're diving deep into the most profound and practical teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Share this with anyone ready to hear what the masters whisper about instant enlightenment. The teaching is available, the lineage is intact, the recognition is possible. Will you look?